What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the CrazyFaceUno Podcast. I'm your host, Shane McNeely. Just a reminder, CrazyFaceUno is inspiring others to do good and make a difference in our local and global community. And it's my honor and privilege to introduce you to my guest. She's someone that I've looked up to as both a mentor and as a friend, Bethany Bylsma. Welcome,
Hi.
Bethany.
Hi.
How's it going?
It's good. How are you?
I'm so good. Thank you so much again for being here and for taking the time to chat today.
You bet. Where in the United States are you right now, Shane?
I know, right? It's a whirlwind. I am currently in Coconut Creek, Florida, so South Florida.
Oh, right. You just moved to Florida. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, my wife and I just moved here. I've been here just over a month now, almost a month and a half. And and you're in Seattle, is that correct?
I am in Seattle.
And
Yep.
if we give the listeners, I guess a foreshadowing of what you're doing now, I like to, like we were talking before, I like to kind of go back from the beginning, but I want people to kind of know, where you're coming from at this point in time. You live in Seattle, and you are a psychotherapist-counselor.
I am a psychotherapist. Yep.
Awesome.
Which I never thought that I would want to call myself a therapist, but
Here we are.
that's what I am. That's what I am. Yep.
Yeah. And for some of you probably listening, and some of you, if you have just tuned in to the podcast, you've maybe never heard me mention Invisible Children, but it comes up quite a bit. Bethany, you and I met at Invisible Children, like so many other people.
We did. Yeah. You were one of my roadies, right?
Absolutely. Yep, I sure was.
And then in charge of all of the fleet.
Yeah. We just kept moving on down the road, didn't we?
Yeah.
Well, Bethany, we were talking before as we got going, or before we got going here. I like to kind of go back and set the stage for kind of who you are and what's made you into the woman you are today. And I think a big part of that is where you started life.
Yeah, right. Yes. So I usually tell people my childhood doesn't seem that interesting because it was my childhood, but when people hear about my childhood, apparently it is interesting to them. So I was born in Alaska, and my dad made a really big deal about that growing up. Like, not many people can say they were born in Alaska, which I guess is true because there are not very many people there or from there.
True.
But my dad is a school teacher, former school teacher, now retired.
Congrats to him.
And he moved to Alaska with his 10 brothers and sisters.
Wow.
In the 60s, right after Alaska became a state.
Wow, that's crazy.
And got married and had his kids. So I lived in Alaska till I was 10, which to me was like a very normal childhood, but not a lot of people, not a lot going on in Alaska in the 80s.
In Anchorage, correct?
In Anchorage, yep, the big city.
The big old Anchorage.
I'm a city girl.
Yeah.
200,000 of us in 1984. Yep.
That's awesome. And how long did you live there?
I lived in Anchorage the first time until I was 10.
Okay. So you spent a good chunk of your time in Alaska then, and growing up.
Yeah, like definitely my young formative years felt very normal, like all-American family. Dad was a school teacher.
Yeah.
Did elementary school. And then my dad and mom decided that they were going to have my dad take a leave of absence from his teaching job. And they wanted to try out short-term missions.
Yeah.
Which at the time, short-term missions meant like committing to 2 years, not your whole life.
Sure.
So it was like, we'll try this out for a couple of years, see how it goes. And so when I was 10, we moved to Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, which is on the equator in East Africa.
Yeah.
Not on the equator, but near the equator.
Still
that
warm.
was kind of a wild ride going from Alaska to
I would say
sub-Saharan Africa. It was a little bit of an adjustment for all of us. We enjoyed our air conditioning.
Yeah, I'm starting to enjoy my air conditioning here in South Florida as well.
I bet.
Yeah,
a little different climate than Indiana.
Yeah, it's a cooler day today. It's like 88. It's fine.
A balmy 88.
Yeah,
it's great.
Yeah, it's great. Sunny. 80% humidity. Whatever.
Whoa.
I mean, I'm throwing that number out there, but it's got to be up there. It's hot.
Sure. It's definitely fall in Seattle. The leaves are turning. We have rain, and I'm wearing sweaters. So apparently, fall has not arrived to Florida yet.
No, it has not. It is not. But I couldn't tell you what that would actually look like. So stay tuned.
It's true. Oh, your first fall in Florida.
I know. But yeah, so you moved to Tanzania
Yes.
at 10 years old. And wow, because I moved a few times when I was younger. So I moved when I was 2 to Illinois, and mostly just between Indiana and Illinois. But and then I moved to another little town in Illinois when I was first grade. And then again, going into my 7th grade year. And so those moves are like...
They're big deals.
They're big deals, yeah. And I don't think I realized it until I've gotten older. And I realized how big they were and like the impact that they've had on me throughout the years,
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. I don't think I understood. I mean, it felt like an adventure when I was a kid, and also like, well, I guess we're moving. If we're moving, I guess I'll go along.
Yeah.
I didn't really feel like I had a strong opinion or that I even was like that upset about it. It just was like, well, I guess if the family's moving, we're moving.
Right.
And as an adult, I have done a lot of reflecting on how kind of traumatic moving is for kids because their root system, their communities change.
Yeah, absolutely. That
hopefully
friendships, those like...
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like my family, like I never even thought about... My dad and I have talked about this in recent, months actually, of like the impact that those moments had on me, and I never really... I honestly hadn't really thought about it until then, as in depth as I have. But he talked about like, well, like we made a lot of decisions that I can see how it's affected you now. And I was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, okay. Like my dad and I are really close, and we, we're pretty open about life in general anyway. But, I was like, well, I don't blame you for anything. Like, I feel like I had a great, solid foundation with my family. Like my mom and my dad, they went through a divorce when I was in high school, but I still feel like I had a good, like, foundation when it came to family. But looking at those different moments, you can see some things, that kind of come out and pop out.
Yeah. I remember when I was in college, my mom, half joking, half serious, asked me, like, did we ruin your life by making you move across the world? And I was like, I don't think so. But at the time, I was having a really hard time knowing how to stay put. Like, I just kept traveling and moving, and it felt more normal to be somewhere temporarily than it felt to settle down somewhere. Yeah. And I think she was seeing that and connecting that to this idea that as a kid, I was settling and then packing up and going somewhere else. And that felt very normal.
Yeah.
I don't think it ruined my life. I'm quite happy with the travel and the choices I've made, but I do think a lot about what would have happened if I had never left Alaska. And I think that I would have had a very different life.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? Just the place that you were born and the place you like grow up, or whatever, has such an impact on the person you become.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's wild. And it doesn't mean that you can't, like things, it's not that you like fit into a specific thing, but it alters and changes and affects who you are so greatly. Yeah. Yeah. So you get to Tanzania, obviously. You were in school. Did you go to a like boarding school, or like what kind of school did you go to when you got there?
Yeah, so it was a tiny little, in most of sub-Saharan, like East Africa, public high schools are boarding schools. There aren't a lot of like drop-in day schools like there are in the States.
Right.
And public, like Tanzanian education is extremely different. Like that was the first, I think, introduction for my family of like different ways that countries educate their kids. And it was based on the British education system, which is very like exam based, preparing for these like mile marker exams that decide whether or not you continue your education, period. Like in eighth grade, or what's called standard 8, you're taking basically your version of the SAT that decides if you get to go to high school.
Wow. Okay.
So it was a big learning curve for my parents, who were going to be school teachers in Tanzania, to figure out. Ultimately, we all ended up at a very tiny private Christian school that had been formed for missionary kids in families that were living overseas, but was also open to, there were a lot of embassy kids, expat kids from all over the world, like a super, super international school.
That's cool.
That was a little bit more of a blend of British education and American education.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it was a very kind of insular, felt like a very safe community for me. Teachers from all over the world, but like Canadian and French and German. And my classroom was much more diverse than it was in Alaska, but it still felt this smallness. Like I went to a tiny little elementary Christian school in Alaska, so my classroom size stayed the same, and it still felt familiar, even though we were 10,000 miles away from what had been home. Sure. And those were just our people for the 2 years that we lived there. Yeah.
Yeah. And like you said in the beginning, I'm sure it's like you don't even think anything about it because you don't know any different.
Right. Yeah. I felt like, oh, this is a weird adventure, but I guess this is what people do.
Right.
Go on weird adventures. Yeah.
Yeah. How are you supposed to know any different?
I actually remember as a kid feeling quite disappointed. I think The Lion King had come out before we moved.
Okay.
And I remember like telling my mom and dad, like I was really disappointed when we got to Dar es Salaam and we lived in a house and I like wore a school uniform and still had to do math. And they were like, why is that disappointing? And I said, well, I thought we were going to live like in a mud hut in the middle of nowhere. And like
Rafiki was going to come out and, teach you.
And they're like, oh, that's what your little brain was preparing for. And here we are living in a city that is in the developing world and is very different from The Lion King, obviously.
Yeah. How long did you guys stay in Tanzania then?
So we were there 2 years.
Okay.
So it was very much the short-term trip that my parents wanted to experience. And we moved back to Alaska after that so that my dad could finish his teaching career and actually retire, so that he could get a pension, complete kind of the teaching for the Anchorage public school system. And so, for 7th and 8th grade, I was back in Alaska. And then we moved to Nairobi, Kenya. And that's where I was for all of high school, all 4 years of high school.
Now, as you got a little older, you'd spent some time there, but when you went to Kenya, now a little bit older, did that have a different perspective, or like, did you have a different, or did you feel like it was just going to be what you had experienced before?
I think I had more of like a angsty teenager perspective. Like I was still excited to go. It still felt like an adventure. But this time I was very aware that I was leaving my friends in Alaska, that I was nervous about if I was going to make friends in 9th grade, that I was aware of what I looked like and would I fit in.
Yeah.
I think my age was part of what had me just more aware of myself rather than like, I'm along for the ride, we'll see what happens. I felt way more aware of how I was going to fit into this place and culture in school. Mm-hmm. In the way that I imagine any, 9th grader going to a new school would be a little bit more aware of themselves than a fifth grader moving to a new school.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And how did that work out? How did you feel like your high school years went?
Fine.
Normal?
I mean, yeah, whatever normal is. Yes, my normal high school experience in Kenya.
Yeah.
It felt very normal to me. I loved my high school. I didn't love high school per se. I didn't love being a teenager, but I loved my school. I felt very safe at my school. I loved my teachers. And I had what to me was like normal, I don't know.
Did I lose you, Bethany?
Are you still there?
Yeah, you're there.
Oh, I don't know what happened.
It's okay. You had what
like,
was
I was on the yearbook staff and I played volleyball, but my experience of playing high school sports when I moved back to the States and I heard other people talk about their experience of being an athlete in high school, it just felt so different. And then I was like, oh, okay, I didn't really have a very normative.
Yeah.
It was for me, but not, I didn't go to prom. I didn't drive a car. Like,
sure.
I didn't have those kind of mile markers that American teenagers have, but I had my own that felt important to me and my experience.
Do you mind sharing what those were for you?
Oh gosh, sure. Like,
you don't have to just hit the high points. You don't have to list them all if you don't want, but.
Well, I think it was, I'm trying to think of the right word. Like, for instance, when we were living in California, right, Shane? Like, we get that there's a water crisis in California.
Sure.
So people were, like, not watering their lawns.
Yeah.
And that was a really big deal.
Yeah.
In developing countries, there are things that are normal, like there's a drought, and therefore we ration power all over the city because it's a hydro-based electricity. And if there's no water, there's not enough electricity to have a city. So every Tuesday and Thursday, our power went off from 6 p.m. to midnight, and we did homework by candlelight.
Yeah.
And when it finally does rain, you're so
excited,
relieved and excited that class is canceled. Everyone runs outside, and you wash your hair in the rain.
That's awesome.
And that felt like one part of my brain is like, this feels like a movie, and the other part of my brain is like, this is your real life. This is what's happening. I
know this is totally different, but moving to Florida for my wife has somewhat been that. She's like, there's palm trees, she's just talked about, she grew up in Minnesota her whole life, and she's like,
okay,
it's like I'm on vacation. I look outside, and there's palm trees, She's like, when does the vacation start to wear off? Like, it's not like I'm working, but it's confusing for the brain. Like, it can't quite compute. And
it's a culture shift.
Yeah, for sure. And for me, our California days, it's it's not, I lived that life a little bit, it's different here, but this beach, the coastal life and palm trees and whatnot, it's I've been there, done that in some ways.
Familiar. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. As you started to graduate, or as you were graduating, high school, junior, senior year, the American tradition is go to college. Was that always on the forefront of your mind, or what did that look like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think as I've been able to reflect on it, I realized what a privileged position I was in, that it never occurred to me to do anything but go to college.
Yeah.
So I didn't actually feel like I had a choice.
Sure.
Except for choosing what college I was going to go to.
Yeah.
Part of that is, for a lot of missionary families, I think it feels like safety. If your parents are going to stay in Kenya and they're going to send their kid to the States, they want, I guess, this feeling or knowing that their kid is going to be okay because they're in another community somewhere.
Sure.
And college is one way that people find community once they graduate and leave home. So it was never a question in my mind whether or not I was going to go to college. The question was where. And while a lot of people choose schools based on the major that they want to study or the reputation of the school.
Sure. Yeah.
I was like, what school is going to be closest to extended family in case something happens and I need to call an aunt or an uncle?
Yeah.
And my family I didn't want to go to college in Alaska. I knew that.
Yeah.
Not a ton of options up there, although there are a few. But I wanted to be somewhere on the West Coast just so that I had access to my family. And my brother had graduated already and was in Seattle. And so I applied to a school in Washington, a school in Oregon, and a school in California.
Nice.
And I picked the school that offered me the most scholarship money. That was my big deciding factor.
Yeah. Which was George Fox University?
Yes, I went to George Fox.
Nice.
Yep.
And what did you study in your undergrad?
Film, actually.
Film.
Cinema and media communication arts.
Nice.
So I did 6 months of interning and working in Hollywood, which was hilarious and cemented in my mind that I did not, in fact, want to be a filmmaker.
Yeah.
But I got to watch a lot of movies in undergrad.
Nice.
And it was really fun. I had a very tiny cohort. I think there were 6 of us in that major at the time. And it was a lot of late nights editing and filming and writing scripts. Yeah, it was great. I had a great time.
Yeah, that's funny. I don't know. I feel like I knew it maybe now that you mentioned it, but like I don't think that's ever something like I remember that you did. Yeah, like the film part. I don't know why that never stuck in my brain.
It's kind of embarrassing to be a film major and then work at Invisible Children and not work in the film department, you know?
Well, I guess so, but I mean, I was an adolescent studying youth ministry major, and I'm doing podcasts now and have this thing. Right. So
we've all arrived exactly where we need to be.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. So you went through that, decided that wasn't for you. Is that when was it at George Fox that you found out about Invisible Children?
Yeah, it was. I was an RA in college, and
nice.
That's resident assistant for all you listeners that don't know my lingo. Yeah. One of the other RAs on staff was from San Diego and actually grew up with Jason Russell. And this is all funny to me now because I know Jason and I'm not in touch with this friend from college at all.
Yeah.
But he came to a staff meeting and said, like, hey, my friend from San Diego just made this movie. We should watch it and, like, show our residents. And I was like, sounds great. And he was like, it's about somewhere in Africa. And I was like, cool. I know about that.
Yeah. I've been to a few places there.
Yeah. So we hosted this screening.
Yeah.
This was before any tours. This was like the rough cut was like bootlegged. It was like a Sharpied rough cut copy. And we played this movie for probably, I don't know, 50 or 60 of our residents.
Yeah.
And it destroyed me.
Yeah. Man.
And
is it funny? Have you ever looked back? Have you ever watched it since? I mean, yeah. Obviously, probably, but like...
Yes, Shane, I've seen the rough cut at least 100 times.
Yeah, that was a dumb question, sorry. But I just feel like... I remember the first time I watched it as well, and I remember the second time I watched it, you know, with like I watched it for the first time with a small group of friends, and then we did a screening as well, and watched it with a bunch of people, and the impact it had on me both of those times, you know, watching it, and then looking back and... Maybe it's because I know too much or like I know so much about Invisible Children, but
yeah,
it's like such a different perspective now looking back at it.
Yes. Yeah, of course. You have so much context, so much backstory now.
Yeah. Not in a bad way. It's just
totally.
It's just like it's just different.
Yeah, it hits you different.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say I have like an especially unique perspective, but what was so impactful the first time I watched it was actually not the Uganda part.
Yeah.
It was the first place that they landed was Nairobi.
Right.
And like, if you remember the beginning of the movie, there's like this little boy falling asleep in church, and there's like a dance troupe, and they're like rapping introductions of themselves. And that was a place that I was super familiar with. I had worked at that same orphanage in high school. I knew those kids. And so seeing someone who's making a film that I'm showing people in Newburgh, Oregon, of a place that I have lived and loved, just felt kind of like this brain explosion of like, what am I doing? How do I get back there? How do I meet these people? How do I get more, like, how can I make my world here as a film major match the world that I moved here from? And it just felt like I want to know these people and be a part of what they're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. There was just this draw that I'm not that, you know, it's different obviously, but yeah, there was definitely a draw to like, how can I be a part of this? Like, this needs the attention for sure. Yes. Yeah. So when did you graduate completely before you went out to Invisible Children?
I did. Yeah. So that was my sophomore year. The first tour, let's see, I can't remember if it was my junior year, was the first tour, like the RV tour. We hosted Roadies. We did a screening. We did the global night commute. I did my internship in LA. Yeah. Blah, blah, blah. Graduated from college, spent a year working at a bookstore, hated everything. Just like everything. Hated everything. And then remembered somewhere in that year that there were things that I wanted to do. There were things that meant more to me that would probably require me to move again, which I was good at. And I got back online, saw that they were hiring Roadies for their 2008 tour, and moved to San Diego the summer of 2008.
Nice. 2008.
Which is 11 years ago.
Isn't that crazy?
It's super weird.
So crazy. Yeah, and I came on fall 2010.
Okay. So 2 years after that.
Yeah, and then, but you probably, so Matt Muljan. Was, you know, he was the 2009, and then he left early and all of that. But yeah, so like that was that year.
And you went to school with Matt, right?
Correct, yeah. And then I lived with him in Minnesota for a few months before. Okay. I moved to a different house basically, but yeah. So like that was. It's crazy because like those worlds kind of collided. Alex Collins, who maybe we can get into these two gentlemen because I think that they, you know, have a part of, you know, a conversation. I think that it would be good to talk about or worth talking about. But Alex Collins is the one who brought Invisible Children to Bethel. Like to Bethel, yeah. And so like him and some other people did the night commuting event before we got there. So I wasn't familiar with that, but 2006 is when I first saw the Rough Cut, and so 2006, you know, had been this thing, and then we had started having Roadies come throughout, and Sabrina Simmerhoff, yeah, she is the reason that I ended up actually deciding to go to Invisible Children.
Oh, Sabrina was your roadie.
Yeah, she was. And then she was in HR when she reached out to me and was like, hey, we need drivers and we need, you know, a male. And, like, I've reached out to you before. I know, like, you said no, but...
But what do you think now?
Yeah, I was like, actually, like, I'm interested. So we started that interview process and kind of moved things forward. So, crazy.
And look at us now.
Here we are. Yeah, and so you start off as a roadie, which for those of you listening that are not familiar with Invisible Children, a roadie is like a traveling presenter. We went to high schools, colleges, places of worship, brought a documentary, shared the documentary, gave people ways to get involved through the purchase of merchandise and, you know, different projects and different
Shane, you still got the pitch. That sounded so good.
I got it.
Wow.
Do you remember, so this is I was thinking about this while I was walking the dog earlier. Do you remember my first, because you were my regional manager?
Yes, I was your manager.
Do you remember my first like Q&A, like pitch deal when we like Ben Kesey, Barrows, you. It was like and Lauren Bailey, and then we got up. We had to do like our intro, and then we had Q&A, and then you kind of got picked apart and whatever.
Like boot camp for public speaking for sure.
Yeah.
I don't remember your first Q&A, but I can only imagine it was terrifying and potentially horrifying.
It was all of those things. Yeah, you had a lot of people, so I'm very happy that you don't remember it. It was bad. Yeah, I had only one way to go after that, so it was awesome.
It's probably good that I don't remember, because the people that I do remember that bombed their like Q&A, it was usually like their nervous tics that I remembered. So there was a roadie who would basically do pirouettes when he was trying to think of the answer to a question, and we just watch him like bend his knees up and down like as the answer was coming to him, and we were like, this is not gonna work. This is not gonna work. Are you aware that you're doing that with your body? So I don't remember you doing pirouettes while you were trying to come up with an answer.
I don't think that was me. Nope, that one wasn't me. I just blanked, just complete like blank.
Oh, it's so stressful.
Oh, so stressful. But I'm my own worst critic, so I was pretty hard on myself and went back to the drawing board and got things back on track. Yeah. So that was good. But I was just thinking about how it's a pivotal moment for me, because I thought I went through college as this, adolescent studies and youth ministry. So basically all of my training was to be a youth pastor, essentially. So I had spoken in front of people. I had
some confidence that maybe other people didn't have.
Yeah, and I felt like I was going to be fine. And then it was just like, nope, completely the opposite. And
nothing like biffing it in front of your 50 closest brand new friends.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Woo. And what such good practice, though. Like I look back on those moments and I still think about how, man, it really shaped just a lot of who I was. It was definitely a foundational time in my life. Like I learned so much and grew so much, and I've grown so much since then. And it was a very foundational part of my life. I don't know how else to say it, but
yeah, totally.
So you were a roadie, you became a regional manager. Did you do, how many tours were you a regional manager? Couple.
Let's see. I think I just regional managed for a year.
Did you? Okay.
Okay. So I was a roadie, and then I was an event coordinator, and then I was a roadie, and then I was a roadie. Okay, I did 3 tours, so 3 semesters as a roadie.
Woo!
I planned the rescue. I was in the office as an event coordinator, and then I became the logistics and Ugandan roadie tour manager.
Yeah, and you kicked some ass, so that was awesome.
It was one of those organizations where you fill the need that is needed, even if you don't really know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. You teach yourself and figure it out.
Yeah, we've talked about, I've had a few people from Invisible Children, and it's funny because like my parents, my dad actually texted me the other day. He's like, man, somebody should write a book about like life after Invisible Children. It seems like such a pivotal moment for so many people. Like they've got so many stories and they're out doing such amazing things now, and I was like, I agree. Like you're not wrong.
Have you listened to my podcast? Have we met? Do you know what I'm doing?
Well, he did kind of mention me writing the book, but I'm not sure that that's something I want to do, but it's a great idea, I think. But
yeah.
So Invisible Children, and then what was your path like after Invisible Children? What did you decide to do, and what led you that direction?
Well, the raw, unedited version is once upon a time at Invisible Children, we decided to put a guy from New Zealand in a cage and raise money in order to free him.
Yeah.
And I remember driving home. I was somehow selected to be the host of that entire experience on live stream. And so I remember driving home at probably 3 a.m. one night after like putting Timmy to sleep in his cage and turning the cameras off and driving home. And I was driving back to La Mesa thinking, and let's be really clear here, I could have just been very tired.
Yeah.
But I remember saying out loud, what the hell am I doing with my life? And something needs to change.
Yeah.
And that was I think that was the first time. I mean, I was still at Invisible Children a year after that, but I think that was the first time I started thinking, like, maybe this is not where I'm going to be the rest of my life. And I really thought at that point, to be working at Invisible Children for 4 years, you were basically a career, like you were there.
Yeah.
You were a permanent fixture at 4 years.
Yeah.
And I hadn't done a whole lot of imagining past that.
Well, but you didn't have time to like imagine beyond that. Like you said, it legitimately could be due to exhaustion that those thoughts came in, and it's not out of the realm of possibility, though it probably had more truth to it than maybe, whatever.
Yeah, I think it just gave me the opportunity to, for the first time, be like, oh, there might be something like outside of locking Timmy in a cage.
For money.
Yeah. And I sat with it, and like I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was pretty certain I was going to end up in international development as a career path. And I'm so grateful for my time at Invisible Children and meeting other staff members who were doing that for their job, working in Uganda, coming back, working with Roadies, and realizing I don't think that I want that for my life. I don't think that I want to live overseas right now. I don't think that I want to do international development as my job, which was kind of a shocking revelation to me.
Yeah.
So I had a little bit of like a identity crisis of like, if I'm not fundraising with a bunch of young weirdos, what am I going to be doing?
It's a great question.
Right. I had a friend of mine who, I don't know, we probably talked on the phone once a year while I was at Invisible Children, happened to call me during this kind of season and was kind of being snarky, kind of joking around, but also not. And she just said, when are you going to move to Seattle and go to grad school? Yeah. And I said, don't you go to the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology? And she's like, yeah. And I said, I do not want my Master's of Divinity. And she said, well, then come be a therapist. And I said, I don't want to be a therapist. And she said, why not? And I said, they're weird. I don't even know what they do. I don't know what a therapist does. But something about that conversation put it on my radar. I looked at the program. I started looking at schools that offered a master's in counseling or in therapeutic perspectives. And it was this kind of strange puzzle piecing together this feeling that I had at Invisible Children, which was I loved my job. I loved the work we were doing, but I really treasured the moments when people would come in my office and like collapse on the couch and cry. That sounds maybe weird, but
no, I think it's such a part of who you are, though. Like, even my first memory of you, Bethany, was like how the regional managers would do one-on-ones with your different teams and the different members, and like I don't remember our conversation at all, but I can remember sitting there and feeling listened and heard, and just I don't know. There's an authenticity, there's a genuineness about you that I think has always resonated with me and you. At least that's how I see you, as just this genuine, authentic person. And I wouldn't say that we were like super close or anything, but I just always felt comfortable going to you, and I've always felt that like it's safe. You're safe. So
Thank you.
It's no surprise to me that you're in the field that you're in.
That I ended up being a therapist after
or that's the part that you enjoyed because it came so natural, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, it has been a weird kind of awakening to that part of myself. I think in retrospect, hindsight is 20/20, right? And so I think back on what we were doing in Invisible Children, what we were trying to change in the world,
And the therapy you provided a kiwi after he was locked in a cage.
Oh, bless his heart.
Yeah.
And that, like, in the kindest, most honest way, we were all being immersed in trauma all the time.
All the time.
Like the story of war, the story of child soldiering, the story of then who became our personal friends. It's like, it's all traumatic.
Yeah.
And there was not a single person on staff that had any kind of training in mental health, in psychology, in understanding what we were doing. And I remember it was after working with the Ugandan Roadies so closely and hearing what was difficult for them about being in the States and what was difficult for them about being in Uganda, and the relationship stuff and the story stuff, where I remember thinking, like, I don't have the language, like, I don't have a vocabulary that can understand all that is happening here, but we are all going through something that is really significant and really deep and really important. Yeah. And I want to understand what is happening. And that was kind of the impetus to get me into grad school, really feeling like I want to become a therapist and come back to Invisible Children and work as a mental health person on staff who can speak to all that stuff that's happening below the surface.
Wow. That's cool.
Yeah. So that's how that's truly how I think it's also how I could tolerate leaving Invisible Children, was telling myself that I would come back.
Yeah.
Because it was such a hard community to leave.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it was. Yeah.
It felt like home when I hadn't had a solid rooted home since I was 10, really.
Right.
It was hard to leave. And so I was able to leave by saying, I'll come back.
Mm-hmm.
I'll make my way back.
I don't even know. I think that this is maybe, you really struck a nerve, I think, with me in some ways, just with that sentiment that we were dealing with chaos. And for me, it wasn't the chaos of, the stories or the tragedy. I felt fine until Coney 2012 blew up. Okay. And blew up in our face. Okay. And I feel like that's where the trauma came in, because and I'm not saying that it wouldn't have came out later, because I think it probably still would have. But I don't know that I've ever dealt with the trauma in the sense of people beating up something that we all cared so deeply and poured so much of our soul into. And it felt not like an attack on a company or an organization that we work for. It felt like an attack on us. Or at least for me, it felt like very, very much like this is we put in so much blood, sweat, and tears, like legitimately, in each and every one of us in different ways. And throughout the time that we spent there, that it was just very personal. And I don't know that I've really ever dealt with it. I've had conversations with people since then, but man, that's hard.
It was a lot.
Yeah.
And it was a lot that we didn't have language for.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was hard. And then leaving, and I don't know what your experience. I'm very interested in what your experience was, like going back to school, but leaving was hard for me in the sense of, I feel like Margie had told us, she had said it 100 times of like, you're going to leave here and it's going to be hard and you're going to feel alone and you're going to like search for this place again. And, it's literally like Narnia, and, it's like you're leaving the wardrobe and I was like, yeah, whatever, but man, she couldn't be any more true. And
yep. Yeah, it was. So I had left once already. I had a 3-month hiatus, I suppose, between planning the rescue and then coming back on the road.
Okay.
In 2009, which is why I didn't know Matt.
Yeah.
Because he left as I was coming on board.
Got it.
But I had this mini experience of leaving Invisible Children, truly believing like that was it, and I wasn't going to be coming back.
Yeah.
So when I left when I left in 2012 to go to grad school, I think that I already had a bit of understanding or expectation about what it was going to be like, and could kind of coach myself or walk myself through knowing what it had been like before.
Yeah.
But I think so. There were so many young people involved, right? That sometimes
Yeah.
leaving Invisible Children meant you're leaving to not knowing what your job is, or you're leaving to go to college, or you're leaving to finish college. And for me, leaving to go to grad school was helpful because it gave me a new container.
Yeah, that community.
Yes.
And that's what I feel like I missed, is the community afterwards.
Right. Yeah, where you're just kind of dumped out on the side of the road, it feels like, and you have to figure out, well, what?
Yeah.
What do we do now?
Yeah. With an inflated ego and inflated, like, you know, you felt on top of the world. Like the things that, you know, and the things that we continually talk about, the people that I've had on here, is how Invisible Children played to your strengths. And like, oh, you're good at that, keep going, you know, and
doing that. Yep.
Allowed you to blossom in certain areas. And, you know, fleet management, you look at any fleet manager, any fleet coordinating positions in the country, and you're going to look for, you know, 5 to 10 years of experience in order to take that position. Who knew that? Like, I didn't know that. I'm like, I got like a year, you know, like year and a half.
You're
maybe.
Like, I know how to drive. That's what you need.
Yeah, I got you. Like, let's go. Like,
yeah.
And so, like, leaving is just like, you felt like you were on top of the world sometimes, and nothing was going to stop you. And then it very quickly came to a abrupt stop.
Yeah, which is really also traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to find yourself when you have made so much meaning, so much community, and so much weight to everything that you're doing, and then to be like, well, I'm grocery shopping. I'm gonna buy a textbook, and I guess I'm gonna like do some homework. I don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you jump into, you went into your post-grad, and was it directly into counseling or psychology?
Yeah. Yep. It was, I started my master's of counseling psychology in 2012, and that involves a couple of years of coursework and then practicums and internships where you're doing it. You're sitting with clients and you're listening and you're thinking and you're making meaning with them and you're holding space for them. And it's been so rewarding. My first couple of years out of school, I worked at a public mental health clinic.
Yeah.
And now I have my own practice. I have a private practice.
Yeah. Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. It's so fun and really scary working for yourself, to be fair.
Yeah.
But also so liberating, so empowering to get to be your own boss, make your own decisions, and really cultivate and create the kind of business, the kind of voice you want to have in the world, and to hear people respond by saying, like, I want to come see you. I want to come talk.
Yeah.
I need somebody to talk to. That has been such a gratifying experience.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I think it's really awesome to see you. You know, I understand it's definitely scary. But yeah, to step out and to do that, I think that's awesome, and to take control and take charge of your own life, and the things that you're doing. I get excited for you when I see you post different things, and and you've also got a little branch of that called the Tender Wild.
Yes. Yep.
And is that right?
Can I talk about it?
Yeah, please.
Can I talk about it? Okay. A lot of my role at Invisible Children was teaching and training, right? Like, you're a roadie, you're on stage, you're in classrooms teaching kids about Central East Africa. You're then in Uganda teaching Roadies, teaching Ugandan Roadies about American culture, teaching American Roadies about Ugandan culture. I love teaching. And I've missed that part of, I don't run groups as a therapist. I work with individuals. Yeah. And so one-on-one conversations are amazing and really important. but I also miss being with groups of people. And so Tender Wild is a branch off of my individual therapy practice where I'm creating and leading retreats so that there are groups of people that I get to work with. And it's really around this idea that came from being a missionary kid, being the child of teachers who work really hard, working at Invisible Children, nonprofits, and seeing what burnout does to people.
Mm-hmm.
And really wanting to work in the culture that we're in, swim in the soup and say, like, let's get out of here. Let's go to the woods. Let's go somewhere quiet. Let's be in community. Let's have meaningful conversation and turn down the volume on everything in your life so that you can get back to yourself, get back to what you care about, what you're passionate about, so that you can take a nap, like, so that you can remember what it's like to be a little bit more whole because you've listened to your body and rested.
Yeah.
And so any way that I can get people to take a day or a weekend away, that is kind of what Tender Wild is about.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm excited. I was as soon as you kind of put out, you've got a few different things coming down the line here, and I was like looking at them like, oh man, how could I make this work? How could I? Yeah. Like I'd totally, it's a goal of mine to come to one of them eventually for sure. Yeah, I want to do that. So you will see me at some point in time. I can make that promise.
Great.
Yeah. And if people want to, check things out a little bit more, you have a website, you have social media.
I do. Yeah. My website is thetenderwilds.com.
Okay.
And that's also my Instagram handle, The Tender Wilds.
Awesome.
I'm partnering with Tyler Dunning, who I understand was also recently on your podcast.
Yeah, he was. And we talked about it there too with his writing retreat.
Yeah.
Which is super cool.
So we're doing a writing retreat with people. I mean, he is a writer, and I tell people he's a professional writer and I'm a professional feeler, and we're gonna do stuff together.
That's awesome.
Out in the woods.
Yeah. I think that's gonna be a really good time for those that are joining you for that. That's gonna be awesome. You two are kicking some serious tail, so that's awesome.
Thank you.
Yes. Bethany, we kind of touched on it, but we've dealt with in a variety of different ways, and I know like each of us has experienced this differently, but we've experienced death and suicide a lot. One within our community of Invisible Children, and in our friendships, but I mean, that's probably the connecting thing for us, but I think in life in general, it's something that we don't get out of this alive. But it's something that is hard to talk about and isn't talked about a lot. And I would love to have, maybe just an open dialogue and just some of the conversation around death and suicide, and maybe from, a professional perspective on,
sure.
The people most recently, Alex Collins, who we mentioned before, played a big role at Invisible Children in the music department, and Matt Muljan, who I lived with, and also worked at Invisible Children for a short amount of time before he left, and both of those deaths, for me are very personal and close, and it hits you in so many different ways. And I just, even at Invisible Children, there's been other, when I came in 2010, just lost Nate, and, Tyler Dunning kind of touched on that a little bit. Lost him in Uganda, and just throughout our lives, I mean, we've experienced death in different ways, I'm sure, and whether it's family members or people we know, but how, I don't know. I don't even know where to start in some ways, but I can tell you that one of the things that has really came of this for me is my intentionality with relationships. And not that everyone, that's everyone's response, but mine has been, I've reconnected with my close college friends because of Matt's death. You know, we've all been able to get back together. We reunited for the first time in 9 years this last summer.
Oh, that's sweet.
Which is awesome, you know, and I think it was healthy for us to kind of go our separate ways and but it's been really great to come back together. And even if the conversation wasn't around Matt, it was just reconnecting and in a way like honoring his life.
Yep.
And, you know, and since Alex, you know, has passed away almost a year to the same time that Matt passed, it's just really been one of those things where through the podcast, through this venture that I'm going on here, it's been beautiful to be able to like really reconnect with people and to truly care and to reach out and to say like, hey, like I see you, I hear you, and I want to be a part of your life. Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And sometimes it feels so disingenuine, I guess, maybe sometimes, but it's real.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, part of me is like, what more could you want? Like,
yeah,
what more could we ask for in marking, honoring, paying attention to someone's death than to like be with the people who are alive and connect and be here now, right?
Yeah.
This is the time we have. Yeah, I've had a rough couple of months since Alex passed away.
Yeah.
I don't even know that I would say it was directly related to that, although I think I've just had a lot of feelings. What? Yeah. I just have felt a lot, like very, very deeply.
Yeah.
Like deep joy, deep sadness. I've been like, can't get out of bed, depressed. I've been super anxious. Yeah. I've been elated. Like, I think the volume has gotten turned up on all of my emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like, since part of it is connected to Alex's death and this idea that like when someone's death feels so loud, and Alex's death,
yeah,
I think because it was by suicide, it feels so loud.
Yeah.
That you have to pay attention to it, and you have to find your way through like where the echo is bouncing. And sometimes the echo bounces for me in community and wanting to fly to Nashville for his memorial, wanting to fly to San Diego for his memorial, wanting to look people in the face, wanting to reconnect. But other days, I think death echoes in these, like, in the dark places where it's sad, it's depressing, there's grief, there's heaviness, and that can feel so loud when people pass away.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the part that I don't think gets talked about, or at least in terms of being a therapist, working with people. So many people will say, like, I've never been able to talk about that. I've never been able to grieve that.
Yeah.
I've never told anybody that before.
Yeah. Do you think some of that is like, I mean, even starting this conversation, I don't even know like the words, right? Like it's like finding words for things that you don't understand and don't fully comprehend. And it's, I mean, at all in some ways, like I don't, you know, when you find those words, it feels so like big.
Yes. Well, I think, like, to be a little bit of a nerd for a minute.
Go for it.
Language is so far away from trauma. Like, when we experience trauma, one of the parts of our brains that, like, goes into hibernation so we can survive it is the part of our brain that forms words and language.
Yeah.
So it's easier to express by yelling or screaming or coloring or drawing or painting or like working out or going for a run or like it's just symbolized differently. But we live in a world that wants us to talk about it, wants us to like, how do you feel? Give me the word, explain what's going on. And when we're in pain, it's really hard to find the right words.
Yeah. So do you think it's like just putting yourself in an environment to like that fosters just openness in some ways, or you know, like you mentioned like yelling, screaming, coloring, working out, like it's just putting yourself in a place that you're open to those words coming to you. It's almost like you can't force it. It's got to
kind of, yeah. I mean, so Alex's memorial in Nashville was a party.
Yeah.
Like there was a church service and there was a formal memorial, but we sat together, we ate, we danced, we laughed, we sat on the floor. Like there was movement. It was very, and Invisible Children, right? Like what do we do at the end of a tour? We have a dance party.
Yeah.
What are we doing on the weekends? We're surfing.
Right.
Right? Like
that was
there
beautiful.
were some ways that to celebrate Alex's life, your whole body had to be involved. Like a paddle out in La Jolla, you're on a surfboard and you are moving those like feelings that don't have words. You're moving them through your body. You're sending them back to the ocean. You're dancing on a dance floor at a club. Like, you're getting to grieve differently than we've, I think, been taught to grieve, or how we've been given permission to grieve. Yeah. It's like, journal about it, write a nice card, right? Write a blog post.
All have to do with words.
Yes.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah, and I don't even. Yeah, that makes total sense to me. With that, and it's just so. It's the lack of words. I don't know. Yeah, that's like that environment of moving and thinking. Yeah, it's beautiful.
It brings to mind, and it can be silly too, right? It brings to mind, like, Tyler and I live in Seattle now, but every year since Nate Henn, which is our mutual friend and roommate in Invisible Children, every year on the anniversary of his death, we eat Whoppers. Right. Which, like, until this moment in talking to you, I've never put together, but we don't really talk about Nate. We go and eat Whoppers, and we, like, Snapchat that we're eating Whoppers. And there's something that we're doing. We're driving to a place. We've ritualized this thing where we're going to remember our friend by eating, which is way more meaningful than sitting around trying to force a conversation once a year about it. Yeah. We have this just different non-languaged gateway into that it is meaningful for us to remember him in this way. Yeah.
That's awesome. I guess I've not really thought of it in that way, so it's just got my brain going. I did see this one. You mentioned something, and maybe this will trigger what you had said, but as I butcher this quote, I saw this thing. It was like, just because what was it? Like, just because it's like something you can lift doesn't mean it's not heavy, or something along those lines. Man, again, I butchered it, but basically it's like it's like something that's heavy, and if just because it's not heavy to you doesn't mean it's not heavy. You know, like just because you can carry the world doesn't mean it's not heavy, you know, or whatever it was. Like, and essentially, like, when you look at someone else's struggles, and just because you can lift that thing, or I think it was just because you can carry a lot doesn't mean it's not heavy. And like, just because you're able to carry all this weight and all this baggage and all this, you know, stuff doesn't mean that it's not heavy, and that it's not heavy for other people, or just because you can carry it well, you know? And I think,
I even think, like, just because you can carry it doesn't mean you have to. Like, part of, I think, how I feel about therapy or the retreats that I'm doing at Tenderwild is, like, just because you have great capacity to care for the world doesn't mean that's not going to affect you later. So, like, take off the backpack for a little bit, take a nap. Yeah. Stop trying to save the world. It's not meant to be your job alone. Yeah. Yeah. Or minimizing your pain, right? Like, just because you can tolerate a lot doesn't mean you should do it alone.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of what it was getting at. Like, just because you can take a lot, or just because you look at someone and they're, like, seemingly dealing with things well, doesn't mean that it's not heavy for them, you know, and doesn't mean that they're not struggling. It just means that it looks different for them. And I think that that's really, I don't know, that stuck with me, I guess. And, you know, everybody's got their own things, and everybody you pass by is dealing with their own issues and their own, you know, things in life, and they're all valid. They're all welcome. And it's part of this platform that I really enjoy, is that I text you, you know, I think everybody has a story, and everybody's story is worth sharing if they want it to be shared, you know, and that's why
that's really how I think of you, Shane. Like my visual representation of you in the world is just like nodding and smiling and like here for it, right? Like tell me, I want to know your story. Like so much energy and enthusiasm around being present with people.
Thanks, B. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm getting emotional with that. I just, you know, it's been something that I've continually dealt with, but I feel like I'm making really awesome strides in the last several months of letting go of the burden of what other people think about me.
That's a hard thing to do.
Man, it's been such a thing I think that I've held on to for so long, and you know, I've just let go of some of those things that I've held on to and kept tucked away. You know, it's safe when it's tucked away and people have this specific image of you, but who cares at the end of the day? Like, and it's heavy, and why carry it? You know, and like, what's the point? Let go of it and show the world that you've changed, and show the world like who you are today by your actions and by what you want to give back, you know, and give the world. And so, yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's a lot of what Crazy Face Uno is right now. Is it's showing up, it's telling stories, it's putting positivity into the world, where in a world that glorifies shit and hate,
right, the drama, the negativity.
Yeah, and I don't want to be associated with that. I want to be associated with, you know, positivity, and I've grown up so much, B, and I mean, even in the last couple of years, I just feel the last 6 months I've grown up and I've changed, and it's like I feel whole again in some ways, and man, here we go, waterworks.
It's okay, I'm a professional, Shane.
Look what you've done. No, I'm just kidding. No, but like, it's just I've really, really, really been working on myself, and you know, we ran into each other and didn't really get a chance to talk at the event last year.
I know, but I want to say that running into you at that event. So, backstory, listening world is I showed up at an event to work with a staff of people as a therapist, and Shane showed up to just hustle. Like, what do you need? You need a walkie-talkie over here? Great, I'll bring it. You need, like, towels in this cabin? I'll bring it. You need food coordination over here? And I remember, like, running into, like, I don't know, did we actually physically run into each other? Because that wouldn't surprise me.
It's possible. I think weren't you, like, in the same, we were in, like, the same, like, cabin or whatever. You were on a different side.
Probably.
And we're like, oh, hey.
Yeah. Which, like, you being you. And I'm hearing you say that you're on a journey.
Yeah.
And like you're using the words like growing up.
Yeah.
But who I ran into a year ago was the same Shane that I ran into 9 years ago.
Yeah.
With some growing up. And I think the gift is we don't ever have to stop growing up. Like we get to talk on the phone a year from now, 10 years from now, and say to each other like, man, I'm still growing up, and it's so rad.
Yeah.
It's not this destination where we reach and we're finally like okay and making great decisions. We actually just keep getting to be alive to whatever the world is offering us and say yes to it and show up with the gifts that we have.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I think that something that I hunger to learn and to grow and to change, and you know, like I think that's always been something that I've wanted and I've continually have been doing. I think it's always been a part of who I am, you know, and I just, maybe it has been in the last year. You know, I talked about it a little bit with Lauren. And we talked about how essentially like I I think that event was a catalyst for where I am today.
That's awesome.
And it just opened my eyes to my value and a theme that keeps coming up. I actually did a podcast earlier today. I did 2 today.
Wow.
I know.
Double whammy.
I know.
Double header.
But something that keeps coming up in more than one, and it's came up throughout this journey, is living on purpose.
Yeah.
And how much, like, it's just fruitful when you're living on purpose. You know, it's like you're getting the nutrients that you need, and it's healthy. And I think it's natural to like fall out of that. But I think it's always that like seeking that coming back. And I think I fell away from, you know, what my purpose was. And I don't know that I ever found it after leaving Invisible Children. And I don't know that I've really found it yet, but I'm getting closer, you know, and I'm continually working that direction, and opened my eyes to just value and, you know, what I want to give to the world and what I'm capable of. And sometimes you forget when it's been, you know, what we just talked about. I left in 2012 and you left in 2012. So it's like 8 years. Like, it's been 8 years since, you know, we left Invisible Children of a place that you had immense value and immense purpose. And every day you were reminded of that value and purpose by the way you woke up and showed up. And, when I left that and always wanting that and seeking that, but I'm not sure I ever found it after leaving that, you know, and
sure.
And of course it has to look different. It's never going to look the same way as Invisible Children, but to not sell yourself short. And I don't, not that I have been, but I haven't really been giving my full potential, I don't think. And, that was a wake-up call in some ways for me, and it came with a lot of mental struggle and, you know, depressed, anxious, and lashing out, and just not the person I want to be. And you look in the mirror at the end of the day and you're like, what is going on, you know, and like, what is happening? And just trying to figure some of that out. And, you know, like we've been talking about with death and suicide and, you know, our friends, that was shortly after, you know, Matt's stuff, and Matt passing away by suicide as well. And our relationship in general Matt and I's was just odd. And so I don't know how much of that played into some of this, but, you know, finally starting to deal with some of that, and just taking a real good hard look in the mirror of like, hey, what do you want? What do you want out of this life? And, you know, quit just going through the motions, and let's start doing.
Living. Yeah.
Yeah.
Being awake for our lives. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's just been a journey. It is this long story short. It's like, yes, I agree with you that it's a continually growing. And I find that that's something that's very important to me, is to never settle and never to necessarily be at this specific destination, but to continue to go back to the well.
And maybe a better way of putting it is continually coming home to yourself.
Yeah.
Like, I get to keep coming home and being like, where have I been? I'm back.
Yeah.
Let's refocus. And then go out and explore, and then get to come home to myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that.
Oh, it's so good to talk to you, Shane.
Yeah, Bethany, it's been really good to talk to you too. Have you been reading any books, anything you'd want to tell our listeners to?
Oh, jeez.
I know you're a reader. Poetry. I've got poetry written down here. Is something you like?
I do love poetry. I'm always reading Mary Oliver and Wendell Berry wherever I am in the world. They're my 2 favorite poets. I am currently taking a nerd class on Carl Jung, who came up with, like, basically the psychologist who introduced this idea of, like, collective consciousness, and that what we think about, what we dream about, is a part of a giant world story. It's being played out on the world stage in every culture, in every country, in every people group, and that we're all way more connected than we think we are.
I love that.
And
that's something like that's part of my, like, I've talked about it on other podcasts, and I came out as like, I don't call myself a Christian anymore. And that's another big step, for me to just kind of like verbally say that to the public and to the world.
Sure. Yeah.
But that's very much a part of my like faith story. And it's not that I don't believe in a higher power. It's just that I think we're way more connected than than the Christian God,
Sure.
And
like, there's more to it than that. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's just, it's bigger than that. And I don't know. I think living beings, we have this like weird, crazy connection. Sounds a little hippy dippy, but it's something I think is true.
It's not hippy dippy. It's not hippy dippy.
Yeah.
I think you would like. Well, if our brains are connected in this way, I'm reading Joseph Campbell is like the granddaddy, the godfather of like modern mythology and how we understand mythology. But he did this interview with Bill Moyers in the 80s. And I'm reading just a book of that interview. It was like, the interviews were at Skywalker Ranch. Like, George Lucas was like, use my property, ask questions, talk about it. And it's just so fascinating. I'm
writing down notes as we go, so I'm looking this up.
Yeah, it's called The Power of Myth, and there's something just so delightful about hearing super smart humans talk about the things that they're super smart in, that still have humility to be like, I don't know, that's a great question, or I don't have an answer for that, or like, I don't know, we don't know what's going to happen next. And I find myself like giggling reading it because it is just so, it's just so invitational to like, be awake to your life, live your life. It's a part of a story. It matters.
Yeah.
Be here, be in community, and see the story that like plays out in the world, and that it's beautiful and it's unifying. And yes, we live in a world where bad things happen. People are unkind. People don't take care of each other. There's so much of that, and there's so much goodness alongside it.
Yes.
So
let's end it there. Let's wrap things up. Bethany,
okay.
Do you wanna add anything to? Do you wanna the Tender Wilds with an S?
The Tender Wilds, I can send along those links.
Yep, and I will plug those into the post and to the social medias so people can find you there.
No, that's all. I just appreciate getting to chat.
Yeah, same. Likewise. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. All right, everybody. Thank you all for tuning in. Really appreciate it. If you have a second, go check out CrazyFaceUno.com. Check out our online store. Got some mugs for sale in there if you want to support the podcast and Crazy Face Uno as a whole, and what we're trying to do with spreading positive storytelling and doing good and making a difference. And if you want to donate, there's also a donate button. Would love for that to be something that you have the ability to do if you would like. Remember, do good, make a difference, and we'll talk to you next time. Thanks. Peace.